I was dragging my last cardboard box across the scorching driveway when 3 police cruisers screeched to a halt in front of my new house, their sirens wailing through the desert heat. The red and blue lights painted wild shadows across the pale stucco walls of Desert Serenity Estates as officers jumped out, hands hovering near their weapons. Behind them, a pearl-white Bentley Continental purred to a stop, and out stepped Cordelia Blackthorne in her signature pink blazer, her platinum blonde hair, shellacked into submission despite the 115-degree temperature, gleamed. She pointed one manicured finger directly at me, her voice cutting through the chaos like a blade through silk. "That's him, officers. He's trespassing on HOA community property. Arrest him immediately for breaking and entering." Her designer heels clicked against the concrete as she marched forward, waving a manila folder like it contained the nuclear codes. The youngest officer approached me cautiously, his hand resting on his handcuffs while sweat beaded on his forehead. "Sir, we're going to need you to explain your presence on this property. Multiple witnesses report you've been illegally occupying this residence and the attached Oasis grounds." I looked around at the gathering crowd, 847 homes worth of curious neighbors pressing against their windows, smartphones recording every second of my apparent criminal activity. The desert sun beat down mercilessly, making the asphalt shimmer like water, and I could taste the dust and desperation in the air. My new house, a 4-bedroom Spanish colonial with that magnificent 2-acre oasis behind it, suddenly felt less like a fresh start and more like a trap. But Cordelia Blackthorne had no idea what she'd just stepped into. Inside the moving box I was holding wasn't just kitchen supplies and old photo albums. Buried beneath the bubble wrap was a document from 1947 that would explain why this particular plot of desert land had sold for only $127,000 at a bankruptcy auction where I was mysteriously the sole bidder. A document that revealed why my property's oasis wasn't just a pretty garden with underground springs. It concealed the master control station for the entire neighborhood's electrical grid, a remnant from a classified government project that made me, technically speaking, the person who could plunge all 847 houses into darkness with the flip of a single switch. 6 months earlier, my life had been completely different. Hold on. Let me pause right here for just a second. If you're already feeling your blood pressure rise from Cordelia calling 911 on an innocent homeowner, go ahead and smash that like button to stand with justice. Hit subscribe because this story is about to get absolutely wild, and trust me, you'll want to see how this plays out. Oh, and if these HOA nightmare stories help you stay alert to neighborhood bullies, that thanks button down there helps me keep exposing these tyrants. Now let's rewind to 6 months ago when this insanity began. My name is Caspian Drexler, and 6 months ago, I was sitting in a courtroom in Phoenix watching my former employer's legal team squirm as the judge read the verdict. Tesla Energy had stolen my patent for a revolutionary solar battery storage system, claimed it as their own, and fired me when I complained. After 3 years of legal battles that drained my savings, ate through my retirement fund, and destroyed my marriage, justice finally arrived in the form of an $8.5 million settlement. The check felt surreal in my hands, like holding solid vindication after years of being gaslit by corporate lawyers who insisted my innovations were work product that belonged to them. The divorce had finalized just 2 weeks before the settlement came through. Sharon got the house in Scottsdale, the Mercedes, and most of our friends who believed her version of events, that I'd become obsessed with a frivolous lawsuit instead of focusing on our marriage. What she didn't get was any piece of that settlement money, a fact that her lawyer reminded her of in increasingly desperate emails I chose not to answer. I needed a fresh start somewhere far from the Phoenix tech scene, somewhere I could disappear and figure out what came next. That's when I saw the listing for the bankruptcy auction in Desert Serenity Estates. The property stood out like a sore thumb among the typical foreclosure listings. A 4-bedroom house with a 2-acre private oasis in an upscale development, starting bid at just $100,000. The photo showed palm trees and desert willows clustered around natural springs, creating an impossibly green sanctuary in the middle of the Mojave Desert. The description mentioned unique historical significance and special maintenance requirements which apparently scared off other buyers. When I showed up to the auction at the county courthouse, I was literally the only bidder, Augustus Weatherby. The estate attorney handling the sale seemed almost relieved when I raised my paddle. He was ancient, probably pushing 80, with liver spots decorating his bald head and fingers that trembled as he shuffled through the paperwork. Mr. Drexler, you've just purchased one of the most interesting properties in the entire Southwest, he wheezed, sliding the deed across his mahogany desk. The previous owner, Mr. Harrison Blackstone, died without heirs, and the estate has been in limbo for 3 years. No bank would approve a traditional mortgage for it. Why not? I asked, signing my name on document after document, each one stamped with official seals and warnings about easements and restrictions I didn't fully understand. Weatherby adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and leaned forward conspiratorially. Let's just say that property comes with certain obligations, historical obligations, federal obligations even. You'll understand once you've spent some time there. The house includes some rather unique infrastructure. He slid a brass key across the desk along with a second, more unusual key that looked like it belonged in a museum. The brass one is for the house, the other one? Well, you'll find what it opens eventually. Just remember, Mr. Drexler, with great power comes great responsibility. I thought he was being dramatic, maybe slipping into senility. I had no idea how literally true his words would prove to be. The drive from Phoenix to Desert Serenity Estates took 4 hours through some of the most desolate landscape in America. Scattered Joshua trees stood like alien sentinels against the blazing sky, and the thermometer in my rented U-Haul climbed steadily until it maxed out at 120 degrees. The development appeared suddenly after miles of nothing. 847 cookie-cutter houses arranged in perfect concentric circles around a central community center, all painted in approved shades of beige and terracotta. It looked like someone had dropped a slice of suburban Phoenix into the middle of nowhere and forgotten about it. My property sat at the northeastern edge, where the manicured lawns gave way to raw desert. The moment I pulled into the driveway, I understood why the photos hadn't done it justice. While every other house in Desert Serenity Estates struggled to maintain a few square feet of grass in the desert heat, my property exploded with green, massive California fan palms created natural shade structures, while desert willows and Palo Verde trees formed living walls around what could only be described as an oasis. The sound of running water seemed impossible in this heat, but there it was, actual springs bubbling up from underground, feeding a series of small pools that sparkled like gems. I'd barely gotten the U-Haul's rear door open when I heard the aggressive clip-clop of expensive heels on concrete. Turning around, I found myself face to face with a woman who looked like she'd been carved from entitled rage and hairspray. She stood about 5'7" in her Jimmy Choos, her pink Chanel blazer somehow remaining wrinkle-free despite the oppressive heat. Her platinum blonde hair was styled in what I can only describe as aggressive soccer mom, and her face had that particular tightness that suggested multiple consultations with Beverly Hills plastic surgeons. I'm Cordelia Blackthorne, president of the Desert Serenity Estates Homeowners Association, she announced, not bothering with pleasantries like, hello, or welcome to the neighborhood. 2 other women flanked her, both wearing similar pastel blazers despite the temperature, clutching clipboards like weapons. We need to discuss your acquisition of this property immediately. Nice to meet you too, I said, setting down the box I'd been carrying. I'm Caspian Drexler. I just closed on the house yesterday. Her eyes narrowed as she studied me, taking in my sweat-stained t-shirt and work boots with obvious disdain. Mr. Drexler, I'm not sure what you've been told about this property, but there are certain community standards and expectations you'll need to understand. This Oasis, for instance, has always been considered a community asset. I felt my eyebrows climb toward my hairline. Community asset? It's on my property. I have the deed right here if you'd like to see it. Deeds can be misleading, Cordelia said, producing a folder from what seemed like thin air. She pulled out a document with an official-looking seal and thrust it toward me. This is the Desert Serenity Oasis Covenant of 2001. It clearly states that all water features exceeding 1,000 square feet automatically become community-managed resources for the benefit of all residents. I took the paper and examined it carefully. Something felt off immediately. The header used Times New Roman font, which seemed odd for a legal document from 2001. More tellingly, the watermark on the paper showed a copyright date of 2015. This is interesting, I said slowly. But Times New Roman wasn't the default font for legal documents in 2001. In fact, this particular version of the font wasn't even released until 2007. Cordelia's perfectly Botoxed face tried to express surprise, but mostly managed a sort of frozen concern. I'm not sure what you're implying, Mr. Drexler, but I'm not implying anything. I'm stating that this document is fabricated also. You might want to know that I spent 10 years as an electrical engineer, specializing in infrastructure documentation. I know what real easement agreements look like. And this isn't one of them. The two women behind Cordelia exchanged nervous glances. One of them, a mousy brunette with anxiety written across her features, actually took a small step backward. Cordelia, however, doubled down. Mr. Drexler, you clearly don't understand how things work in Desert Serenity Estates. We've maintained certain standards here for over 20 years. This Oasis has been used for community events, wellness retreats, and HOA gatherings since the development was built. That's fascinating, I replied, maintaining eye contact. And I assume you have documentation of the previous owner agreeing to this arrangement. Harrison Blackstone was a difficult man who refused to integrate with the community, Cordelia snapped, her composure cracking slightly. He hoarded this beautiful resource for himself, preventing families from enjoying what should rightfully be shared. We hoped his successor would be more reasonable. The word reasonable dripped with threat. And I suddenly understood why this property had sat empty for 3 years. Mrs. Blackthorne, I appreciate your position, but I purchased this property legally, including all structures and natural features within its boundaries. I have no intention of surrendering my property rights based on a forged document. Her face flushed red beneath her makeup. You have 72 hours to reconsider your position, Mr. Drexler. After that, the HOA will be forced to take more aggressive action to protect community interests. I strongly suggest you review your situation carefully. Things can become very uncomfortable for residents who don't cooperate with community standards. She turned on her designer heel and marched away, her two minions scurrying behind her like trained poodles. As their footsteps faded, I noticed something odd. Cordelia had dropped a business card. Probably intentionally, it wasn't for the HOA. It was for Desert Serenity Wellness Retreats. With her listed as CEO and founder, the tagline read, "Experience tranquility in our exclusive natural oasis." A website URL was printed at the bottom. That evening, after unloading half the U-Haul in the crushing heat, I sat in my new kitchen with my laptop and pulled up the Desert Serenity Wellness Retreats website. What I found made my jaw drop. Cordelia was running a full-scale commercial operation using my Oasis, charging $500 per person for exclusive dessert meditation experiences and celebrity wellness immersions. The Instagram page linked from the site had 50,000 followers and showed photos of yoga classes, sound bath ceremonies, and something called desert rebirthing rituals, all taking place in my backyard. The most recent post, from just 3 days ago, advertised a summer solstice transformation retreat with 20 spots available at $2,000 each. My Oasis wasn't just being claimed as community property. It was being used as Cordelia's personal ATM machine. The escalation began the very next morning. I woke at 6 a.m. to find a bright orange violation notice taped to my front door. Improper vehicle placement. $50 fine. Vehicle extends 2 inches beyond designated parking area. I walked outside, and sure enough, my rental U-Haul's bumper extended marginally past some invisible line that apparently constituted a grave violation of community standards. By noon, 2 more notices had appeared. Unapproved exterior modifications, $75 fine for placing a potted plant on my porch, and excessive noise during quiet hours, $100 fine for the heinous crime of unloading boxes at 8 p.m. The previous evening, the second day, brought a parade of inspectors, each one apologetic but insistent. Jim from the county electrical department showed up at 7 a.m., followed by Sandra from the water authority at 9, then Miguel from the fire marshal's office at 11 dr. Each one had received an anonymous complaint about serious safety violations at my property. Each inspection turned up nothing, and each inspector mentioned off the record that they had been called to this address multiple times over the past 3 years, always with the same result: no violations found. Between you and me, Jim confided as he packed up his equipment, whoever keeps calling these in is wasting taxpayer money, but they know exactly how to word the complaints to trigger mandatory inspections. They cite specific statute numbers, reference recent incidents in other counties, make it sound urgent enough that we have to respond. On day 3, things got personal. I discovered my mail had been rifled through, with several envelopes torn open and discarded on my lawn. My water was shut off for maintenance that nobody could explain, leaving me without functioning toilets or showers in 115-degree heat. When I called the utility company, they had no record of any maintenance scheduled for my address. It took 4 hours of increasingly frustrated phone calls to get it turned back on. That evening, as I sat on my porch trying to enjoy the cooling desert air, an elderly man shuffled over from the house next door. He had to be pushing 80, with deep wrinkles carved by decades of desert sun and sharp eyes that suggested his mind was still razor-sharp despite his age. "You're the new owner of the Blackstone place," he said. It wasn't a question. "I'm Solomon Hendricks. Been living here since the development was built in '98. Caspian Drexler," I said, shaking his weathered hand. "I'm getting the feeling, Mr. Blackstone wasn't very popular around here," Solomon snorted. Harrison Blackstone was a paranoid old coot who trusted nobody and kept to himself. He was also the smartest man I ever met and the only person who ever stood up to Cordelia's bullying. He lowered his voice, glancing around nervously. "That woman has driven out 5 families from this street alone in the past 3 years. Always the same pattern: harassment, fines, inspections, legal threats. Eventually, people get exhausted and sell for below market value. Let me guess. The buyers are always connected to Cordelia somehow. Shell companies. But yes, her husband Reginald is a real estate developer. They've been systematically acquiring properties with historical significance or unique features. Yours is the crown jewel, though. Harrison knew something about this land that he never told anybody. Something that goes back to when the government used this area for military projects." My pulse quickened. "Military projects?" Solomon nodded slowly. "During World War II and after, this whole region was restricted military space. They tested things out here. Built installations that were never on any public maps. Most of it was decommissioned in the '70s. But Harrison always said some infrastructure remained. He used to joke that he had the power to shut down the whole neighborhood if he wanted to." "You think he was serious?" "With Harrison, you never knew what was true and what was paranoid fantasy. But I'll tell you this. Desert Serenity Estates has never had a power outage. Not once in 25 years, not during storms. Not during the rolling blackouts in 2001. Never, the power company says. We're on the main grid like everyone else." But Harrison always smirked when they said that. Solomon stood to leave but turned back with one final warning. "Be careful, son. Cordelia might look like a typical HOA busybody, but she's connected to people with real power and real money. The last family that tried to fight her ended up in bankruptcy court. The husband had a nervous breakdown and they fled the state. That night, I couldn't shake Solomon's words about military projects and hidden infrastructure. I walked through my new house with fresh eyes. Looking for anything unusual, the layout was standard enough. Living room, kitchen, 4 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, but the garage was oddly deep, extending further back than seemed necessary. The back wall had shelving units that looked like they hadn't been moved in decades. I started pulling the shelves away from the wall and discovered they were on hidden casters designed to move easily despite their apparent weight. Behind them was a door painted to match the concrete and nearly invisible unless you knew to look for it. The unusual key Weatherby had given me fit perfectly into a lock that turned with well-oiled precision. The door opened onto a narrow staircase descending into darkness. I grabbed a flashlight from my toolbox and made my way down, the temperature dropping 20 degrees with each step. At the bottom, motion sensors triggered overhead lighting, revealing a room that belonged in a military bunker, not a suburban home. The space was maybe 20 by 30 feet, with concrete walls 2 feet thick and a ceiling reinforced with steel beams. But it was the equipment that made me gasp. An entire wall was covered with electrical panels, switches, and monitoring equipment that looked like it came from a different era. Analog meters measured voltage and amperage, while a massive breaker panel displayed labels for every street in Desert Serenity Estates. A desk in the corner held logbooks, their leather covers cracked with age. I opened the newest-looking logbook and found entries in Harrison Blackstone's shaky handwriting, dated just 3 years ago. "The fools have no idea they're living on top of a classified military infrastructure project. The Desert Power Initiative of 1947 created an independent electrical grid for research facilities in this region. When the military pulled out in '78, they left the infrastructure in place, hidden beneath residential development. This control room manages the master switches for 847 homes, one flip of the main breaker, and the entire community goes dark." My hands shook as I kept reading. "Cordelia Blackthorne has been collecting $200 monthly from every household for electrical infrastructure maintenance for 20 years. That's $169,400 per month, over $40 million total, but the power comes directly from the federal grid at no cost. A remnant of the military agreement that was never terminated. She's built an empire on stolen money, and she knows I know. That's why she needs this property. Without control of this room, her entire fraud could be exposed. I sat back in the ancient office chair, my mind reeling from the implications. I owned more than a house with a nice oasis. I owned the literal power switch for the entire community, and evidence of a $40 million fraud that would send Cordelia to federal prison. The next morning, my phone rang at 5:30 a.m. It was Luna Park, an attorney who'd left a business card in my mailbox with a note saying, "You're going to need help." Her voice was crisp and professional despite the early hour. "Mr. Drexler, I heard about your interaction with Cordelia Blackthorne. I represented a family she destroyed last year, and I've been documenting her activities ever since. Can we meet?" We arranged to meet at a coffee shop in the next town over, away from potential eavesdroppers. Luna was younger than her voice suggested, maybe mid-30s, with sharp eyes behind designer glasses and an intensity that suggested personal investment in this fight. "Cordelia destroyed my clients, the Winthrop family," she began without preamble. "They owned a property with natural hot springs on the western edge of Desert Serenity. She harassed them for 18 months, constant fines, inspections, legal threats. She even had their teenage son arrested on fabricated drug charges that were later dropped. Eventually, they sold their $2 million property for $800,000 to a company called Desert Holdings, LLC, which we traced back to Cordelia's husband. Solomon Hendricks mentioned she's driven out multiple families. Luna pulled out a tablet and showed me a spreadsheet. 23 families in 8 years, always properties with unique features. Natural springs, historical buildings, mineral rights or infrastructure access. The total value of properties acquired through harassment is approximately $31 million. But that's not the worst part, you know what? Looking at these numbers, $31 million in stolen property, $40 million in fraudulent electrical fees. I have to ask, what would you do if you discovered your HOA president was running a criminal empire right under everyone's noses? Would you fight back or run? Drop your answer in the comments below because, honestly, I'm curious how many of you would have Caspian's courage. Speaking of which, let's see what he decided to do with this nuclear information. Luna swiped to another document. Cordelia's wellness retreat business generates approximately $200,000 per month, none of which is reported to the IRS. She's been using your Oasis to run a commercial enterprise while claiming it's a community amenity. The celebrity clientele she attracts includes actors, tech executives, and politicians who have no idea they're participating in trespass and fraud. How has she gotten away with this for so long? Her husband, Reginald, owns Desert Community Bank, which holds mortgages for 60% of Desert Serenity homes. Her brother is a state senator. Her lawyer is the former district attorney. She's built a network of protection through intimidation, bribery, and strategic relationships. The families who tried to fight her didn't just lose their homes. They lost everything. But you're still fighting. Luna's expression hardened. The Winthrops were my godparents. Their son Jason attempted suicide after the arrest. He's okay now, but I swore I'd take Cordelia down. When I heard about you buying the Blackstone property, I knew this was my chance. Harrison Blackstone left behind evidence, didn't he? Something that could destroy her. I hesitated, then decided to trust her. He left behind proof that she's been defrauding the entire community for 20 years. But it's bigger than that. The property contains infrastructure that predates the development, military infrastructure that gives me certain leverage. Luna leaned forward. What kind of leverage? The kind that could turn 847 homes into a very dark, very hot desert if I chose to use it. Her eyes widened. The power grid. The rumors were true. You control the master switches, every single one, and I have documentation proving that Cordelia has been charging residents for electrical maintenance. That doesn't exist because the power comes free from a federal program. That was never terminated. Luna sat back, a smile spreading across her face. Mr. Drexler, we're not just going to beat Cordelia Blackthorne. We're going to destroy her entire empire and make sure she spends the rest of her life in federal prison. Over the next week, Luna and I built our case methodically. She filed Freedom of Information requests that revealed the Desert Power Initiative's history. a classified program to provide uninterruptible power to military research facilities in the Southwest. When the facilities were decommissioned, the infrastructure remained, hidden beneath what would become Desert Serenity Estates. The federal government still paid for the electricity as part of a legacy program that nobody had bothered to terminate. Meanwhile, Cordelia's harassment campaign intensified to levels that bordered on insane. I received 17 violation notices in 3 days, each more ridiculous than the last. Unauthorized photosynthesis was my personal favorite, claiming my Oasis plants were producing excessive oxygen that violated air quality standards. The fines now totaled over $3,000, and liens had been placed on my property. She also escalated to criminal tactics. My car tires were slashed twice. Security cameras I'd installed were spray-painted black in the middle of the night. A dead coyote appeared on my doorstep with a note saying, "Outsiders don't last long in the desert." When I reported these incidents to the sheriff's department, the deputy who responded said his hands were tied. Without hard evidence linking these acts to specific individuals, there's nothing we can do. Maybe you should consider moving somewhere safer. But Cordelia had made a crucial mistake. In her arrogance, she'd sent me a formal letter on HOA letterhead demanding I cease and desist from investigating community electrical arrangements and threatening legal action if I continued to spread malicious rumors about long-standing maintenance agreements. She had essentially admitted in writing that she knew about the electrical situation and was actively covering it up. Luna was ecstatic when she saw the letter. This is consciousness of guilt. She's admitting to knowledge of the arrangement and attempting to suppress investigation. Combined with the fraudulent billing records, this is enough for federal wire fraud charges. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. Using Harrison's old equipment in the bunker, I mapped out exactly how the electrical grid worked. Each house had its own breaker, but they were arranged in zones that could be controlled independently. The community center, where HOA meetings were held, had its own dedicated circuit with a manual override switch. I could control it separately from the residential areas. I also discovered something else in Harrison's files. Photographs from the 1970s showing the construction of Desert Serenity Estates. The developers had built directly on top of the military infrastructure, using it as the foundation for the community's utilities, but they had signed agreements acknowledging the federal government's continued ownership of the underlying systems. Cordelia's HOA had no legal authority over any of it. Solomon Hendricks knocked on my door one evening with urgent news. Cordelia's called an emergency HOA meeting for tomorrow night. Word is she's going to propose a special assessment to fund legal action against you. She's asking for $5,000 per household to create a war chest of over $4 million, $4 million to fight one homeowner. She's scared, Caspian. Really scared. I've lived next to Harrison for 20 years. And I saw her try everything to get him to sell. But you're different. You're younger, smarter, and you have resources. She knows you're a threat to everything she's built. The night of the HOA meeting, I prepared carefully. I loaded all the evidence onto my laptop, made backup copies on multiple USB drives, and gave Luna remote access to everything in case something happened to me. I also did something else. I connected my laptop to the bunker's control system through a secure remote desktop connection. If necessary, I could control the entire electrical grid from my phone. The community center was packed, with all 847 households represented. The air conditioning struggled against the body heat and tension in the room. Cordelia stood at the podium in a power suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly mortgage payment, her face glowing with the confidence of someone who'd never lost a fight. "Neighbors and friends," she began, her voice dripping with false concern, "we face an unprecedented threat to our community's harmony and values. The new owner of the Blackstone property, Mr. Caspian Drexler, has engaged in a systematic campaign to undermine the standards and agreements we've maintained for over 2 decades. She clicked through a PowerPoint presentation that painted me as everything from a mentally unstable recluse to a potential terrorist. Photos of my house, taken from angles that required trespassing on my property, showed violations circled in red. A graph purported to show property values declining since my arrival, though I'd only been there for 2 weeks. To protect our investments and our way of life, Cordelia continued, the board proposes a special assessment of $5,000 per household to fund legal action that will preserve our community standards. Hands shot up around the room. A man in his 40s stood up. Cordelia, $5,000 is a lot of money. What exactly are we funding? Legal proceedings to enforce community standards and protect shared resources, she replied smoothly. Mr. Drexler has refused to acknowledge the communal nature of the Oasis and threatens to restrict access to amenities we've all enjoyed for years. That was my cue. I stood up slowly, my laptop bag in hand. Mrs. Blackthorne, since you are discussing my property, perhaps I should be allowed to present some relevant information to the community. Her face went pale, but she couldn't refuse without looking dictatorial. You have 5 minutes, Mr. Drexler. I walked to the front, connected my laptop to the projector, and pulled up my first slide, a copy of the Desert Power Initiative documentation. Ladies and gentlemen, what if I told you that you've been paying $200 a month for electrical maintenance that doesn't exist? That for 20 years this money has been collected for services that are provided free by the federal government? The room erupted in confused murmurs. Cordelia slammed her gavel. Mr. Drexler, these baseless accusations are documented facts, I interrupted, clicking to the next slide, showing billing records. 847 homes paying $200 monthly for 20 years equals $6 million. Money collected for maintaining an electrical grid that has been fully funded by the federal government since 1947. I clicked again, showing Harrison's photographs and documentation. The Desert Power Initiative was a classified military program that built an independent electrical grid for this region. When Desert Serenity Estates was constructed, it was built on top of this infrastructure. The federal government still owns it, still maintains it, and still pays for every kilowatt of power you use. The crowd's murmur turned into angry voices. Someone shouted, "Where's our money gone then?" I pulled up the next slide. Cordelia's wellness retreat website. Some of it has gone to fund Mrs. Blackthorne's private business, which operates illegally on my property. Desert Serenity Wellness Retreats generates $200,000 monthly from celebrity clients who pay thousands to use an oasis that Mrs. Blackthorne doesn't own. This is slander. Cordelia shrieked, "I'll sue you for every penny you have." Please do, I said calmly. Discovery will be fascinating, but before you do, there's something else the community should know. I pulled up a photo of the control room in my bunker. The Blackstone property contains the master control station for the entire community's electrical grid. Every house, every streetlight, every building in Desert Serenity Estates gets its power through switches located in my basement. To demonstrate, I pulled out my phone and opened the remote desktop app. For example, if I press this button, I tap the screen, and the community center plunged into darkness. Gasps and screams filled the air. After exactly 10 seconds, I restored the power. I control everything. When the lights came back on, Cordelia's face had gone from pale to green. "You can't, that's illegal. You're threatening us." "No, Mrs. Blackthorne. I'm informing the community that they've been victims of a $40 million fraud. And I have one question for everyone here. Do you want to give this woman another $5,000? Or do you want to call the FBI? The room exploded. People were shouting, arguing, demanding answers. Several homeowners surrounded Cordelia, demanding to see financial records. Others pulled out phones, calculating how much they'd paid over the years. Solomon Hendricks stood up, his voice cutting through the chaos. "I motion for an immediate vote of no confidence in the HOA board and a full forensic audit of all financial records." "Seconded." Luna Park called out from the back, revealing her presence for the first time. The vote was overwhelming. 793 households voted to remove Cordelia and her board immediately. 54 abstained or had already fled the meeting. As Cordelia gathered her things, her hands shaking with rage, she turned to me with pure venom in her eyes. "You have no idea what you've started," she hissed. "I have connections you can't imagine. Resources you can't match. You think you've won? I'll bury you in legal proceedings for the next decade. I'll make your life such a living hell that you'll beg me to buy that property for pennies on the dollar." "Mrs. Blackthorne," I said quietly, "you're forgetting one thing. I don't just have evidence of your fraud. I have the power to make your life very, very dark every time you flip a light switch, every time you open your refrigerator, every time you try to use any electrical device. Remember, I control it all," she stormed out, her heels clicking furiously on the linoleum floor. But I knew this was far from over. Cordelia Blackthorne had built an empire on fraud and intimidation, and she wouldn't go down without a fight. The real war was just beginning. That night, as I sat in my Oasis, listening to the springs bubble in the darkness, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You've made a powerful enemy, watch your back." I smiled, typing back a simple response. Let her come. The next few days would determine whether I'd won my freedom or signed my own death warrant. But either way, Cordelia Blackthorne was about to learn what happened when you tried to steal from someone who literally held the power in his hands. The retaliation came at 3 a.m., exactly 48 hours after the HOA meeting. I woke to the sound of breaking glass and the smell of smoke. My living room window had been shattered by a brick wrapped in a note. Final warning, sell or burn. But the smoke wasn't from a fire. Someone had released military-grade smoke grenades throughout my house, filling every room with thick, choking clouds that sent me stumbling outside, coughing and gasping for air. The fire department arrived within minutes, followed by the sheriff's department. As firefighters cleared the smoke, Deputy Rodriguez examined the scene with a grim expression. "Mr. Drexler, these aren't civilian smoke grenades. This is military equipment. Whoever did this has access to restricted materials." While giving my statement, I noticed Cordelia standing on her lawn 3 houses down, wearing a silk robe and holding a glass of wine at 3:30 in the morning. She raised her glass in a mock toast when our eyes met, her smile visible even in the darkness. The message was clear. She could reach me anytime she wanted. Luna arrived as the sun was rising, her face tight with anger. She's escalating beyond civil harassment. This is criminal intimidation with military hardware. We need federal involvement immediately. I have a contact at the Department of Energy, I said, remembering a former colleague from my Tesla days. The infrastructure angle might get their attention. That morning, I made the call that would change everything. Marcus Rivera, now an investigator with the FBI's Energy Crimes Division, listened to my story with increasing interest. When I mentioned the Desert Power Initiative and the $40 million fraud, he interrupted me. "Mr. Drexler, stay where you are. Don't talk to anyone else about this. I'll be there in 4 hours." While waiting for Rivera, I went down to the bunker to document everything. That's when I found something Harrison had hidden even deeper. A secondary safe behind the electrical panels. The antique key had a smaller companion I hadn't noticed before, which fit perfectly into this hidden safe. Inside were photographs, military documents, and something that made my blood run cold. Contracts from 1947 showing that Cordelia's father, Colonel Theodore Blackthorne, had been the military commander overseeing the Desert Power Initiative. The documents revealed that Colonel Blackthorne had illegally sold information about the infrastructure to private developers in the 70s, pocketing millions in bribes. When the military discovered his corruption, they buried the scandal to avoid embarrassment. But they'd kept the evidence. Cordelia hadn't just inherited her HOA position. She'd inherited a criminal empire built on her father's treason. Rivera arrived with a full FBI team, their black SUVs drawing curious stares from neighbors after reviewing the evidence. His expression was deadly serious. "Mr. Drexler, this is one of the largest infrastructure fraud cases we've ever seen. The theft of federal electricity alone puts this in major felony territory, but the military connection elevates it to potential espionage charges." Espionage? Selling classified military infrastructure information to private parties is treason, even decades later. If Cordelia knew about her father's activities and continued to profit from them, she's an accessory to espionage. That's life in federal prison. As Rivera's team photographed evidence in the bunker, my phone rang. It was Solomon Hendricks, his voice shaking with panic. "Caspian, Cordelia's lost her mind. She's called an emergency board meeting. Just her and her remaining supporters. They're at the community center right now. And I heard them mention something about cutting power to force a sale." I looked at Rivera. "She's going to sabotage the grid to blame me." "Let's go," Rivera said, motioning to his team. We arrived at the community center to find Cordelia and 5 board members huddled around building blueprints and electrical schematics. Through the window, I could see her pointing at various junction boxes, clearly planning something catastrophic. Rivera positioned his team around the building while I walked in through the front door, my phone recording everything. "Planning some electrical work, Mrs. Blackthorne?" I asked casually. She spun around, her face contorting with rage. "You! This is a private meeting. Get out immediately. Actually, I own the infrastructure you're discussing, so I think I'll stay. Those look like plans to sabotage the power grid. That would be a federal crime, wouldn't it? One of the board members, a nervous man named Davidson, stepped back from the table. Cordelia, you said this was about legal strategy. Not whatever this is. Shut up, you coward, she snarled. We're saving our community from this outsider who thinks he can waltz in and destroy everything we've built. Everything you've stolen, you mean? I corrected. Tell me, Cordelia, did your father teach you how to monetize stolen military infrastructure, or did you figure that out yourself? Her face went white. How do you know about Colonel Theodore Blackthorne, the treasonous commander who sold military secrets for personal profit? I found his records, all of them, including the ones showing he established the shell companies you're still using today. She lunged at me with surprising speed for someone in designer heels. Her manicured nails aimed at my face. I stepped aside, and she crashed into the wall behind me. As she scrambled to her feet, screaming incoherently about her father being a patriot, and me being a nobody who didn't deserve to breathe the same air as the Blackthorne family, Rivera and his team burst through the doors. FBI. Nobody move, Rivera commanded, his badge gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Cordelia Blackthorne, you're under arrest for wire fraud, racketeering, conspiracy to commit infrastructure sabotage, and accessory to espionage. You can't arrest me, she shrieked as agents cuffed her. Do you know who I am? My husband owns the bank. My brother is a senator. I'll have all your badges. Your husband is being arrested at his office as we speak, Rivera informed her. Your brother is under investigation by the Senate Ethics Committee. Your entire network is crumbling, Mrs. Blackthorne. As they led her away, she turned to me one last time, mascara streaming down her face, her perfect hair now a disheveled mess. This isn't over, Drexler. I'll get out. And when you do, you'll be a convicted felon living in a halfway house, I interrupted. Your wellness retreat is shut down. Your HOA is disbanded. Your $40 million fraud is over. You're done. Cordelia. She screamed obscenities as they dragged her to the FBI vehicle, her designer shoes scraping against the pavement, her pink blazer now stained with tears and ruined makeup. The other board members were also arrested, though Davidson immediately offered to cooperate in exchange for leniency. The next 72 hours were a whirlwind. FBI forensic accountants descended on Desert Serenity Estates, seizing records and freezing accounts. They discovered that Cordelia's fraud extended far beyond what we'd initially found. She'd been selling access to the federal grid to cryptocurrency mining operations, pocketing an additional $3 million annually. She'd been using HOA funds to pay for personal expenses, including a yacht, a vacation home in Aspen, and plastic surgery for herself and her 3 daughters. The wellness retreat alone had generated $12 million over 5 years. None of it reported to the IRS when they raided her home. They found luxury goods worth over $2 million, all purchased with stolen funds. Her husband Reginald's bank was immediately placed under federal oversight when investigators discovered he'd been approving fraudulent loans to facilitate the property theft scheme. But the most shocking discovery came from Cordelia's personal computer. She'd been keeping detailed records of her crimes, apparently planning to write a book about how to build a real estate empire after she retired. The document included confessions to crimes we hadn't even discovered yet, including bribing county inspectors, threatening witnesses, and coordinating with a Mexican cartel to launder money through the wellness retreat. Luna called me, laughing in disbelief. She documented everything. It's like she was proud of being a criminal mastermind. The prosecutors are calling it the most comprehensive self-incrimination they've ever seen. The community meeting held 1 week after the arrests was standing room only. Rivera presented the FBI's findings to the assembled homeowners, explaining that each household would receive full restitution for the fraudulent electrical fees they had paid over 20 years. The average refund would be $48,000, with some long-term residents receiving over $60,000. Furthermore, Rivera announced, the Department of Energy has agreed to formally transfer the electrical infrastructure to a community trust managed by elected representatives. Your power will remain free, funded by the federal program that was always supposed to benefit you. The crowd erupted in celebration. People were crying, hugging, calculating what they could do with their refund checks. Solomon Hendricks shook my hand with tears in his eyes. You did what Harrison never could. You didn't just expose her. You destroyed her entire criminal empire. 3 months later, I sat in a federal courtroom watching Cordelia's sentencing. She'd aged 10 years in 90 days, her platinum hair now showing gray roots, her designer clothes replaced by a plain black suit from Target. The judge, a stern woman named Patricia Thornton, read the charges with barely concealed disgust. Mrs. Blackthorne, you betrayed the trust of 847 families. You stole millions of dollars meant for community infrastructure. You destroyed lives through systematic harassment and intimidation. You corrupted public officials and attempted to sabotage federal property. Most egregiously, you continued your father's treasonous activities, profiting from the sale of classified military information. Cordelia stood silent, her lawyer having advised her that anything she said would only make things worse. I hereby sentence you to 22 years in federal prison, without the possibility of parole. You will pay full restitution of $43.6 million to the victims of your crimes. Your properties, vehicles, and assets will be liquidated to fund this restitution. You will be permanently barred from serving in any fiduciary capacity. May God have mercy on your soul, because this court has none. As they led Cordelia away, she looked broken, defeated, a shell of the woman who'd terrorized a community for 2 decades. Her husband, Reginald, received 15 years for bank fraud. Her brother resigned from the state senate and fled to Costa Rica. The entire Blackthorne dynasty collapsed in less than 6 months. The transformation of Desert Serenity Estates was remarkable. Without Cordelia's iron grip, the community flourished. The Oasis became a true community space with a playground for children, walking paths for seniors, and meditation areas that were actually free to use. The wellness retreat buildings were converted into a community center, offering free yoga, counseling, and after-school programs. Luna and I started dating about 4 months after the arrests. It turned out we both had a passion for obscure science fiction novels and terrible kung fu movies from the 70s. She moved into the Blackstone house, now officially the Drexler house, and we spent evenings sitting by the springs, planning our future while the desert sunset painted the sky in impossible colors. A year after that first confrontation with Cordelia, Desert Serenity Estates held its first annual Freedom Festival. 800 families gathered in the Oasis for a celebration that lasted all weekend. There was music, food, games for kids, and a special ceremony honoring those who had stood up to corruption. They unveiled a plaque at the community center reading, "In memory of Harrison Blackstone, who kept the lights on, and in honor of Caspian Drexler, who brought justice to our community." Solomon Hendricks gave a speech that brought tears to many eyes. For 20 years we lived in fear of fines, fear of harassment, fear of losing our homes. But one man with courage and conviction showed us that bullies can be beaten, that justice can prevail, and that sometimes the power really does belong to the people. The federal government used our case as a model for investigating HOA fraud nationwide. The Drexler Protocol became standard procedure for uncovering infrastructure-related crimes. I was invited to testify before Congress about predatory HOA practices, and my testimony helped pass the Homeowner Protection Act, which established federal oversight for associations managing more than 500 homes. Luna and I got married the following spring, with the ceremony held in the Oasis at sunset. Solomon officiated. He'd gotten ordained online just for the occasion. Even some of Cordelia's former victims flew in for the celebration, finally able to return to the community they'd been forced to flee. During the reception, Rivera pulled me aside with news that made the victory even sweeter. "Cordelia tried to arrange a hit on you from prison. We intercepted the communication. She just added another 10 years to her sentence. She never learns, does she? People like her never do. They can't accept that their actions have consequences, by the way. The Department of Energy wants to offer you a position as a special investigator for infrastructure fraud. Interested?" I looked at Luna, laughing with our guests, at the community that had become our family, at the Oasis that had started all this chaos and ultimately led to justice. "Thanks, but I'm exactly where I want to be." 3 years have now passed since I moved into that house in the desert. The U-Haul that brought me here carried more than just belongings. It carried the catalyst for exposing one of the largest HOA fraud schemes in American history. Cordelia Blackthorne is serving her 22 years in a federal facility in Texas, where she reportedly spends her time writing angry letters to politicians who no longer care. She exists. The Oasis remains green and vibrant, fed by springs that have flowed for thousands of years, indifferent to the human dramas that play out around them. Children play where celebrities once paid thousands for exclusive meditation sessions. Families picnic where Cordelia once plotted her neighbor's destruction. The desert has reclaimed the Blackthorn name, erasing it like wind eroding footprints in sand. Sometimes I go down to the bunker, to that room full of switches and controls, and marvel at the power I never wanted but was forced to wield. Every breaker, every switch, every meter tells the story of a community that was held hostage by one woman's greed and freed by the simple act of turning on the lights. Literally and figuratively, Luna is pregnant now, and we're preparing to welcome our first child into a world where the power belongs to those brave enough to flip the switch. We've decided that if it's a boy, we'll name him Harrison, after the paranoid old man who kept meticulous records and trusted no one. If it's a girl, we'll name her Justice, because sometimes that's exactly what the universe delivers when you least expect it. The last letter I received from Cordelia came 6 months ago, forwarded through her lawyer. It was a single line. "I should have burned your house down when I had the chance," I framed it and hung it in the bunker. Right next to the master power switch, every time I look at it, I'm reminded that evil doesn't always come in obvious packages. Sometimes it wears a pink blazer, drives a Bentley, and calls itself a pillar of the community. But no matter how much power it accumulates, how many people it terrorizes, or how untouchable it seems, sometimes all it takes to bring it down is one person willing to flip the switch. The lights in Desert Serenity Estates have never shone brighter.